Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to everyone to today's ISIP, International Students of Islamic Psychology lecture. And I will share our slides. We will get started, inshallah. If everyone could kindly keep themselves on mute, we would appreciate it. So today's lecture, inshallah, is entitled Resilience in Testing Times, Islamic Psychological Insights for Healing and Growth. And we are super excited that our co-founder, Seyed Jamaluddin Miri, is our lecturer today. So just briefly, we will start with our Fatiha. We welcome everyone. I'll share some of the guidelines, the questions that you can send. Please send them in the chat. And then Brother Seyed Jamaluddin will be sharing with us on the topic. We will have some times for question and answers. And throughout the session, inshallah, I will be sharing some links as well for ways for everyone to continue to participate and to know about ISIP's initiatives. In order to make the best of this time that we have together, we just are reminding, please, if you can keep yourselves on mute when not speaking. The chat is open, so you can interact in the chat, but please keep your microphones on mute. Feel free to keep your cameras on. It helps to create a sense of community. You can rename yourself, as I mentioned. You can include the place that you're joining us from. I see Australia and Scotland and Netherlands and India already, mashallah. It helps to build that global ummah. So, mashallah, my name is Fatima and I am joining from Canada. If you, for any reason, would prefer or request or need, the live transcription is available. ISIP aims to strive for being inclusive. And so, again, you may press the 3 dots more, and you may request that, and you will get the transcription as well going if you should desire that. Briefly, for anyone who may be joining us for the first time, welcome to International Students of Islamic Psychology. We are an inclusive space designed to connect people with their diverse backgrounds who are interested in Islamic psychology. You don't need to be a student or involved in psychology. This is really very open to people who are trying to grow and who may just have an interest in Islamic psychology. But we also, at the same time, do have scholars and have PhD candidates and people who are involved in these fields also a part of ISIP. So welcome to everybody, different ages, all across the Ummah. We aim to disseminate knowledge, share resources, and discuss best practices in a free and accessible manner. And we hope to be a platform that has enabled people to further their development, both personally and professionally. So there are ways that you can continue to participate, which inshallah I will be sharing as we go along. So we have a YouTube channel. We have, alhamdulillah, over 10 different languages now of ISIP lectures and over 200 recorded lectures that are available for anyone who subscribes and can find them on our YouTube channel. We also have Islamic psychology WhatsApp groups and our website, www.isip.foundation. We have a digital library there where people can access resources that have been curated as well. I'll give a moment if anybody should like to join the the Islamic psychology WhatsApp group. You would need your WhatsApp camera to scan this and join if you haven't already. You're welcome to do that. This is where we're sharing a lot of our initiatives both the ones that ISIP is holding, as well as global events from all over the world. Sometimes there's calls to papers that are also shared on here from different organizations. You're more than welcome to join that. We're going to start with our Fatiha, and then I am very honored and blessed to introduce our co-founder and our executive director, Brother Seyed Jamaluddin. So we'll pause here with our Fatiha. We ask everybody to, inshallah, bring our beautiful intentions to hold this space, recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has reminded us that the gatherings where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam are mentioned, that the angels are descending and filling. So we're filling our space, inshallah, in the company of angels. This is the blessed month of Ramadan. Allahumma barik lana Rajab wa Sha'ban wa ballaghna Ramadan. We're coming upon the great night of Isra and Miraj. So just holding all these beautiful intentions, of course, and holding a healing intention, inshallah, for our brothers and sisters all over the world who are suffering. Of course, we are all witnessing what's happening in Palestine as well. So if we can make our Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. All right, it's my great honor, alhamdulillah, to introduce our brother Seyed Jamaluddin. He is a licensed counselor in Sweden. He has a postgraduate diploma in Islamic psychology from the Cambridge Muslim College. He's also a certified IAIP, Islamic psychology practitioner, and has certification in practicing the TIIP, the traditionally Islamically integrated psychotherapy from the Ibn Khaldun University and the Khalil Center. He is the co-founder of ISIP-International Students of Islamic Psychology, and he is the executive director of the movement. He is the co-founder of Al-Balkhi Institute of Islamic Psychological Studies and Research, Rafiq Counseling, Fatwa Academy of Sacred Manhood, and the Nasheed Academy of Sacred Arts. He's also, besides being a commissioner editor at Beacon Books, he is also currently studying in the master's program in clinical psychology. I have had the honor of working with Seyed Jamaluddin for the last couple of years through ISIP, and alhamdulillah, we're very blessed to have his passion and his leadership in this movement. And without any further ado, Seyed Jamaluddin, it is yours.
Jazakallah khairan, dear Sister Fatima. Thank you so much for your amazing presentation and your contribution as also one of the co-founders in ISIP. Your tremendous efforts in normalizing Islamic psychology all around the world, together with your excellent leadership and knowledge, is truly admirable. I want to thank all of my excellent colleagues in ISIP, Sister Nadira, Sister Mediha, and all others who are helping with international lecture series, Sister Sema, Sister Jenny, and all other colleagues for your amazing efforts, all of our brothers and sisters and all of our task forces, all of our organization committees for all their contributions and time. I want to thank all of you as participants today in this session, dear brothers and sisters from all over the world. It's such an honor to have you all with us. Thank you so much for joining and giving out of your precious time. And I already want to ask for forgiveness for my presentation. So if I say anything wrong or in any shape or form, convey any message in an edited way, please forgive me for my shortcomings. And if anything good comes from my presentation today, it's all from Allah Azza wa Jal, and all the shortcomings are mine. I'm delighted to see that we have people from all over the world joining the session today. We have people from Singapore. We have a brother from the Rohingyas. I spoke with Brother Muhammad before. He's one of our brothers from the Rohingya community living right now in Bangladesh. Brother, I'm sorry that I'm not always able to answer your messages on WhatsApp, but we're with the Rohingyas. We're with the Rohingyas. We're with the brothers and sisters in Myanmar. and the Uyghur brothers and sisters. We are with all of our Palestinian brothers and sisters, all of our Sudanese brothers and sisters, all of our Yemeni brothers and sisters, all of our brothers and sisters that are going through occupation, genocides, colonization, and trials and tribulations. We're with you. Islamic psychology is a source for justice, a source for liberations of the soul, a source for freedom, a source for reconnecting with fitra and our natural disposition towards tawheed. So all of our du'as and all of our efforts in ISIP with all of our amazing colleagues and brothers and sisters from all over the world, and all of you who participate today doing khidmah, advocating for a more just world. This is really admirable, and we're very honored to be with all of you. So thank you so much for allowing me to present today, actually. Usually I host what Sister Fatima did in a great way. Today I will present. And actually, brothers and sisters, feel free to ask all of your questions in the chat, inshallah. And Sister Fatima and Sister Nadira will share some resources from ISIP throughout the session, our Islamic Psychology WhatsApp groups, our YouTube channel, our LinkedIn, our Instagram, etc. Feel free to join the movement. We have right now established a task force for those who want to work with crisis support, where we try to bring in resources from Islamic psychologically and counseling point of view, and all types of, whether it's natural disasters or like right now the situation in Gaza. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring ease to all of our Palestinian brothers and sisters. Feel free to join our task forces. Our email addresses will be shared also, and how you guys can join our different initiatives within the ISIP, the International Students of Islamic Psychology. My lecture today, my beloved brothers and sisters, will be about resilience and testing time, Islamic psychological insights for healing and growth, inshallah. All right, Bismillah. So I wanted to start, my beloved brothers and sisters, and all of our participants from all over the world, and honored to have you with us. I would like to start with a personal anecdote. Just this anecdote I wrote as part of journaling that I did throughout my studies at the CMC, about pain and suffering and my relationship towards pain, suffering, and trials and tribulations in life, ibtidal and bala. So I just wanted to share an outskirt and a quote from my journaling, where I'm quite open about my relationship towards suffering, for instance. So this is what I wrote. This may sound masochistic, but it's certainly not my intention to glorify pain or suffering. But the closest I've come to reconnect with the true nature of my heart has been when I've been at my deepest struggles in life, subhanAllah. During these times when things that I have subconsciously taken for granted, such as health, work, family, friends, etc., suddenly disappeared due to illness, loss of relatives, loss of work, etc., and I'm left with the aftermath of the pain suffered of these losses, sorrow, physical pain, financial worries, etc. When I then start thinking about the losses, I often come to realization that, alhamdulillah, there is always hikmah in all pain. Time will tell. Time really is my heart's best friend. It's something I personally seen and experienced several times in my life. Initially, the feeling that the pain was unbearable to deal with became more bearable over time. The events that I truly felt would end my life literally led to a spiritual awakening in time with sabr and with tafakkur. Why Allah? Why me? These types of why questioning eventually became acceptance of Allah's qadr and will, and questioning turned into dhikr, praises and salawat towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Thank you, Allah. Thank you for giving us, your servant, such a perfect example in our beloved Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and in his way of dealing with the tumult of the dunya. Ya Allah, thank you. When I start to build myself up from the trials I went through, then that's when I felt closest to the true nature of my heart and its testimony of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was then that I felt closest to my soul and its connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the wasila that it is. However, as time passes, time can also show its double-edged nature, an allusion to the double-edged sword, as a proverb that defines something that has or can have both favorable and unfavorable consequences. As time passes again, without proper safeguards, This could lead one to the state of hafla, forgetfulness, once more. When normalcy strikes back and things start to settle down, then one tends to forget what one has been through, and one perhaps begins to engage in one's ibadah as a routine again, a routine of the limbs rather than of the heart. The cry of the Lord, the cry of the heart to its Lord, felt during the time of tribulation, is now a voice of the past as we continue our walk in the dunya, without being in a constant state of dhikr, shukr, gratefulness, and tafakkur, contemplation, muraqabah, introspection. Am I a hypocrite? The scholars used to talk about the ritual acts and worship of the hypocrites, which are performed only outwardly without any inner form of worship to enliven and give one's worship an inner meaning and dimension. Zahir, the seen, versus batin, the unseen, the inner. Zahir, the outer, batin, the inner. From being connected to my heart's true nature, I realized that time can both connect one to one's heart's essence, but without proper safeguards, time can also lead one to the state of hafla once more. And why I wanted to share this anecdote with you, brothers and sisters, and I'm sure many of you could relate to this, that even though we don't ask for trials and tribulation, we don't ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to test us, we don't ask to go through struggles in life. Of course not. That's not something that we ask for. But we also know that we will be tested, right? And in all honesty, for me personally, without asking for it, of course, the moments where I felt closest to Allah Azza wa Jal was when I was in some form of sickness or some trial or tribulation. And I'm sure you guys can relate to that. And that's where you do not take things that you take for granted anymore in life. Because sometimes when we are up in our daily life routines, we tend to forget to be grateful towards Allah. This is not intentionally done. I think many of us are grateful constantly, but we tend to take things for granted, like food, like having a house, like having a job, etc. But as soon as, some form of trial and tribulation strikes you, then you are reminded again, wait, I should not take things for granted. And that's where the whole aspect of facilitation to come to a higher spiritual state and an emotion, maqam and hal comes, and ahwal comes into place. So, Islamic view of trials and tribulations, bala. I wanted to share a quote from one of the great scholars of Islamic psychology traditionally, Ibn Ajiba, a Moroccan scholar. He said, if the real reveals himself to you by his divine name of Al-Jalil, the majestic, or by his name Al-Qahar, the all-powerful, and has opened to you a door and a perspective through which he may be known thereby, know then that God has taken special care of you and has desired to choose you for his presence, to single you out for his presence. He inflicts upon him tribulations until he becomes upright and purified, and becomes fit for the divine presence, just as silver and gold are purified by fire for the treasures of kings. SubhanAllah. Just imagine what Ibn Ajiba says, SubhanAllah, is very striking, that going through struggles and trials, it's like having silver and gold purified by fire. So the fire is the trials and tribulation, which purifies you, strengthens you, and forges you. Like the way when you put iron in fire, it's a way to forge the iron, right? So it's a very beautiful quote that we can have in mind as we are speaking about the topic of today. So why God? Why pain? So sometimes when we go through pain, we go through suffering, we go through trials and tribulations, we might come with a why question sometimes. Why me? Why pain? Why? And this is connected to the theodicy of suffering. And let me explain what theodicy means, dear brothers and sisters and colleagues all over the world. Theodicy means the problem of the evil, which is a framework used in mainly Christian thought, in all honesty, but it became introduced into Islamic thought as well. And the theodicy issue deals with the issue of explaining God's existence, more precisely how God can be both perfectly good and all-powerful when there is simultaneously evil and suffering in the world. So when we come with a proposed solution to a theodicy notion, then we call that a theodicy. All right. So for instance, we have bad in the world because of you coming closer to Allah or knowing things by its opposite. So how are you supposed to know good if there is no bad in existence? When you come with these type of explanation, that is a theodicy. So within Islamic thought, until modern era, we have never had a so-called theodicy problem or a theodicy issue. Rather, this is something inherited from the Judeo-Christian and secular tradition of thought. So we usually didn't discuss these things historically, and there is a reason for that. So for instance, classical Islamic theologians sought to explain the phenomena of transient pain and suffering by investigating whether human beings can obtain moral knowledge on pure reason. All right. So according to the theologians, moral facts like good and evil are not ontological features of this world and do not have an ontological reality. Rather, moral facts correspond to God's commands and prohibitions. That is, good is that which reward is attached to, and evil is that which punishment is attached to. So therefore, God cannot be attributed with evil, and what is considered evil is relative to the subjective experiences of the person from which they cannot transcend. As moral facts are only knowable through scripture, God is the source of true moral knowledge. So to make a claim that God allows absolute evil is to assume that we have access to the moral knowledge as God sees it. And that we know all the variables as God knows them. So a distinction is therefore made between absolute evil and pain and suffering in this world. This is quite interesting, brothers and sisters, because when we make a moral claim of evil, what we really intend by it is pain and suffering, all right? And then we have one of the great scholars, Ibn Furak, who relates to some quotes and notions from Al-Ashari. And this is his quote. There is only one sense for evil and good in the observable. That what is evil is avoided from the imperfection and harm that it results in for the one who does it, and that the good and wise act is chosen because of the benefit and perfection that it results in for one who does it. There is no ground for the act's performance or omission in the observable, but this or its like. So we tend to not do the evil because we know it's harm connected to that, and we should do the good because it's benefits from it. And what is good and bad is mentioned to us through scripture, through wahi, and through the sunnah of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And also sometimes things that we might think good, bad, it might be bad, might be good. But we don't know that, so we don't attribute that to Allah. The things that are bad, we don't attribute it to Allah. We know that everything comes from Allah. We believe in Qadar Allah. We believe in predestination. But things that we might think is bad is because of our shortcoming of understanding whether it's good or bad. This is our shortcoming when we see it as bad and we don't attribute it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though everything comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because we believe in Qadar Allah, predestination. All right. And this is also something that is very important for us to understand when we go through trials and tribulation, that, we don't put blame in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need to implement something we call husnul dhan billah, to have a good opinion of Allah. And then you can also try to have a good opinion towards people, but human beings are flawed. So even though it's part of our tradition to have husnul dhan bil nas, which is to have good opinion of people, we also know that people are flawed and people can be misled. So there we have husnul dhan, but we can also understand that people have shortcomings, weaknesses. So that's not ultimate, but husnul dhan billah is ultimate because Allah is perfect, right? The creation is not perfect. The creator is perfect. So what is considered good and evil is based on the outcome of the occurrence. That is the degree of benefit or harm that it results in for human beings, which is determined by human beings. And now, dear excellent brothers and sisters and participants, an honor to have you all with us. Two questions still remain. One, why does God allow pain and suffering? And two, what is the purpose of pain and suffering? So one, let's answer one. Islamic theologians made a distinction between God's will and what he creates into existence, and his love and what he prefers and is pleased with. So it is precisely because of God's ability to create everything into existence that he is all powerful. And it's because of God's love that the suffering that people go through, for instance, people that are refugees, people that are oppressed, etc., should be alleviated as an command, amr, and that the perpetrators should be held accountable for their choices. Because God states in the Quran, indeed, Allah orders justice and good conduct and giving their relatives and forbids immorality and bad conduct and oppression. He admonishes you that perhaps you will be reminded. So we should definitely take stands towards oppression, towards injustice. This is a command, an amr, which is also mentioned in the Holy Quran. All right. As for harmful actions, and in this case, the existence of pain and suffering someone have undergone on the hands of other human beings, it is a consequence of free will. If free will was constrained to remove pain and suffering that occur from human beings, then we would not be free-willing beings. It's also a good reminder for us. And then let's answer the second question that I asked earlier. The purpose of pain and suffering, what is that? As for instance, one of the great scholars of the Islamic tradition, Ibn Taymiyyah, explains, are a part of the order of this world because they serve God's wise purpose for his creation as he is all wise. Ibn Taymiyyah says, and I quote, some servants may know some of God's wise purpose, and what is hidden from it may be hidden from them. People are favored over others in knowledge of his wise purpose, his mercy, and his justice. Each time the servant increases in knowledge of the realities of things, he increases in knowledge of God's wise purpose, his justice, his purpose, his mercy, and his power. SubhanAllah. So a person increases, right, in spiritual excellence by trusting God more than himself and becomes receptive to spiritual openings. To achieve an intimate station with God is to undergo spiritual purification through the cultivation of virtues. A person can achieve a heightened awareness of the reality of God by tasting the imperfection of the reality of this world through pain and suffering. So through pain and suffering, we are actually becoming humans, right? And then we can also see all the virtues that exist there, because that could be part of our spiritual trajectory in our own tazkiyat an-nafs, purification of our self, of our hearts. Something that is very important, dear brothers and sisters, to mention is also that things are known by its opposites. This is a good reminder for myself, first and foremost, and maybe for all of us. And what do we mean with that? So, for example, pain and suffering are necessary because things are known by their opposites. A person in a perpetual state of pleasure cannot understand the concept of pleasure because he has not experienced pain to consciously understand the state that he or she is in. And Imam Ghazali, one of the great scholars of our tradition, explains, health is not enjoyed without illness. The blessed in paradise would not know their blessedness without hell. And perfection is not known without imperfection. SubhanAllah. So once a person accepts pain and suffering as part of the order of this world, there is an existential recognition which goes beyond the question of why. That undergoing pain and suffering is simply confronting reality at its hardest edges. The small aspect of reality is part of a greater reality in which pain and suffering are created for God's wise purpose for creation. So what Imam Ghazali said is that how are we supposed to know what Jannah is if Allah has not described Jahannam, right? How are we supposed to know what sweet is if we don't know what sour is, you know? What salt is if we don't know what bitter is? What sour grapes are if we don't know what baklava is? You see what I'm saying? So by its opposite, we understand things, all right? And that's why we have good and bad, because if we're only, as we were reflecting upon, only held in a state of felicity, sa'adat, all the time, then we will take it for granted because we don't know if this is felicity or not, because we haven't experienced anything that is the opposite of. All right. So it's also good, dear brothers and sisters, just 1 second, please. It's also good that we speak about the role of suffering from a fitra-centric lens. All right. So the fitra is our primordial state of pure disposition and witnessing Allah through His divine names and attributes. It is part of our fitra, this witnessing as an imprint on our souls. And as we come into the world, into dunya, we are in the state of pure fitra and connection to Tawheed through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine names, the witnessing. But as we grow in the dunya, in the world, through our socialization processes, through our connection with our parents, through our upbringing, our tarbiyah, our relationship with people, socialization, we are going from a state of pure felicity, of being in this connection with Tawheed and the oneness of Allah, to duality. What is duality? There is reality of Allah, but then in the dunya, everything is from Allah, of course, but we are understanding now beyond just being fully connected with fitrah. Because when we are born, we're in a state of fitrah, full state of fitrah. And the first primeval wound and loss of being in this full, enjoyable state is when we come into dunya. When we come into dunya, it's our first wound, the first loss, the first primeval loss of this full felicity that we were experiencing before we came into dunya. If you notice, specifically to all sisters here who have children, or for all of you who have experienced the birth of a child as parents or as siblings, one thing we know for sure is that when the child comes up, the first thing that a child does is to cry. Why? Because that's the first wound, the first loss, the first pain of being in a full state of felicity, which is full connection with fitrah. And the child cries until the mother holds the child closely, hugging the child, and then the child feels secure. And the child stops crying, all right? After a while, the child starts to see, wait a minute, my mom is amazing, and may Allah bless all of our mothers, you're all amazing, but she is not perfect. Allah is only perfect. My mom is not perfect, right? So as the child is projecting the loss and the longing back to fitrah to the mother, after a while, the projection fails because mom is not perfect. Even though moms are great, she's a human being. She doesn't always come when I'm screaming, to give me food. And then the child starts to cry, and then maybe the father starts to caress the child, and the child feels a little bit soothed. But after a while, the child understands that the father is not perfect, starts to cry. And this is the whole aspect of socialization in dunya and the world. And as we socialize and project more and more, we also disconnect more and more from fitrah, because nothing will be as perfect as Allah in the creation. Nothing in the dunya. Until the child, as he or she grows through tarbiyah, through education, through parenting, will be educated to reconnect to fitrah again. But this time, when a person reconnects as a child or as an adult to fitrah, our natural disposition, our pure disposition towards tawheed, this time you are doing it mindfully. And I'm going to speak more about this later, because when you were born, you were not aware that this is fitrah, because you were just in the pure state of felicity. But through the trials and tribulations and the socialization mechanism in dunya, in life, in the world, in the dunya, the worldly life we're living, when we mindfully reconnect to fitrah, this time we have done it by tasting the opposites. All right? And then we mindfully go back to reconnecting with fitrah, but with the experiences that we have acquired in our worldly life. All right? So this is very important that we are mindful of the role of suffering from a fitra-centric lens. So as we enter into a state of taklif, which is when we become mature, when we become accountable of our action towards Allah, God Almighty, we can then go into our spiritual wayfaring and suluk. So the spiritual wayfaring, the suluk through, for instance, spiritual practices like mujahadat al-nafs, to fight the nafs, the tazkiyat al-nafs, to purify your soul, your heart, riyadat al-nafs, to discipline yourself, your soul, your heart. That's a one way to reconnect to fitra, okay? And layers of experiences and social conditioning that created the duality, the opposites. We try to perfect ourselves through that. And it's necessary to have this in order to consciously and mindfully, as I mentioned, dear brothers and sisters, reconnect. And reconnect to fitra is also to uncover the process of how we can reconnect to fitra, a natural disposition towards tawheed. So the accumulation of dunyavi, worldly experiences enables us to return to reconnection with fitra and that witnessing that we've been part of through our natural disposition towards tawheed. It gives us deeper appreciation of the primordial experience of divine witnessing, connection through fitra. And this is a cyclical process in an elevated form. So we actually, when we say we need to go back to fitra, it's not to say we need to go back to becoming a child. No, not at all. That's a misconception. We're never going back to being a child because we're in a higher state now than a child, because this time through our socialization procedure, through our upbringing, through our trials and tribulations in life, we are mindfully reconnected, which is a higher state, a higher spiritual state. So why not a perpetual state of felicity? So dunya, the world, and the experience of duality gives us something to measure felicity by. And that is by suffering, which is its opposite, as what Imam Ghazali said, right? And qualities are known by their opposites. Now, I want to speak about a psychological theory within mainstream psychology today, dear beloved, excellent brothers and sisters and participants, which is called ambiguous loss. This is a really interesting theory that we can ponder about together, inshallah. So ambiguous loss is defined as a loss that occurs when you're not able to process a loss, or there is no likelihood of reaching emotional closure or clear understanding of the loss. This leads a person to search for answers, which delays the process of grieving and results in unresolved grief, or what we also could define as frozen grief. So ambiguous loss, the result could be frozen grief, okay? So there are two types of ambiguous loss, dear brothers and sisters. The first type is physical loss, which means that a physical ambiguous loss means, for example, that the body of a loved one, for example, is no longer around, such as a missing person or unrecovered body from war, but is still remembered psychologically due to the chance of coming back, for example. That's why when a loved one passes away, it's so important for us as Muslims, but even for non-Muslims, to go through the, burial ceremony. In our case, the janazah, right? It's so important because it's a way of saying goodbye to this person that we love and that we will miss, but it's part of our grieving bereavement process. But when you don't have that body there, that hurts the whole grieving process. It becomes a hurdle, actually. So a physical ambiguous loss can occur across generations as well. This is called intergenerational trauma, such as the families of victims of genocide and colonization, and can be a cause of traumatic stress and PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, etc. The other type of ambiguous loss is psychological loss. So a person is still physically there, but it's psychologically absent. So this happens in cases where the brain is affected of a seizure or something, therefore affecting the behavior or well-being of the individual. Psychological ambiguous loss does not just occur to family and friends of the person affected. It can happen personally to a person as well, in terms of one losing sense of who they are. For instance, when they go through different psychological struggles, like disassociation, etc. Please forgive me. This can stem from having a traumatic brain injury and not knowing who they are, causing a lost feeling and uncertain identity issue. Now, connected to the theory of ambiguous loss, we have the grieving process. So the grieving process for an ambiguous loss is quite different from regular grief in the case that one is not able to find closure due to unresolved or unprocessed grief. In cases of a psychological ambiguous loss, for example, the grieving process or procedure can be especially difficult because of the inability to accept or admit that there is a problem and confront the situation in the first place as we deal with the situation and with the context. And as we deal with it, if we're able to deal with it, resilience can come. So one key factor in getting over an ambiguous loss is resilience. In the normal grieving process, people obtain closure after dealing with a loss. In an ambiguous loss, however, closure does not exist and should not be sought after in this case. So resilience, sumud, which we will speak about later in this presentation as well, and hope, raja, are important in the case of an ambiguous loss, because together they're able to allow a person to come to terms with the loss. And a lot of studies, dear brothers and sisters, have shown that religion is one of the main factors that contribute to resilience. Trauma and ambiguous loss often coexist together, and if the trauma is not dealt with, it can trigger unresolved emotions and ihsas. To restore resilience could be a therapeutic way for us as counselors, myself and other excellent colleagues, and people in the audience, dealing with ambiguous loss and reconnecting with the loss and the relationship with whom the loss is associated with. This is good to have with you when you're working therapeutically and with counseling as well. And there are 3 types of grief according to this theory. One type of grief is anticipatory grief. All right? This occurs before bereavement. For example, upon realizing that death may be the outcome for a loved one. Typically amongst families with loved ones who are having chronic diseases, this is a thing. The grief becomes anticipatory due to the knowledge that the loved one's psychological or physical state will become worse. So the grieving process starts early. This could be quite healthy. I'm sure you guys have been through this if you have an older parent or grandparent that are going through amnesia or Alzheimer's or Parkinson. That is something that becomes worsened with time, right? And then you are anticipating the whole situation, and then you can start the grieving process much earlier. The second type of grief is unrecognized grief, which often occurs when the grief is not taken seriously. You just shove it down. You just, shove it under the mat. So that's called unrecognized grief. And the third type of grief, which I will focus on actually in this presentation, is frozen grief, which is a result of the ambiguity of death, for example, because of the physical or psychological disappearance, and therefore one's grief is frozen, since one do not get a chance to let the grief run its normal course. This is called frozen grief. And this takes me to something that is very relevant for our situation right now. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easier for our beloved Palestinian brothers and sisters. All of our du'as and all of our intentions and hearts and all of our prayers are with our beloved Palestinian brothers and sisters, both in Palestine and in the diaspora. And I want to give you guys an example of frozen grief or unprocessed grief. Who is this person in this picture? I want you guys to write in the chat, beloved brothers and sisters and colleagues from all over the world. Write in the chat, who is this person? And Sister Fatima, I can't read the chat. Maybe I can read the chat. Let me see here. Yeah, I can read the chat. Who is this person? Please write in the chat. Take a guess. The person on the picture in the slide, who is this? Herzl, exactly. Exactly, Jemra. This is Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl is the father or the founder of Zionism. And all of us are criticizing Zionism. And I think it's so important to differentiate between Zionism and Judaism. Judaism is a religion. It's a religion that we see as Ahl al-Kitab, the people of the book. And we do see Jewish people as our cousins, as Muslims. Zionism is an ideology that is criticized by many Jews, by the way. And not all Zionists are Jews, by the way. This is very important. We have Christian Zionists right now. and other Zionists that are not Jews. And Zionism is a secular ideology, by the way, but has taken religious connotation. So this person is the founder of Zionism, all right? Theodor Herzl. He was born in Vienna during the same time as Sigmund Freud was active, actually. Sigmund Freud, according to Western psychology, is considered to be the father of Western psychology, all right? What we tend to not know is that actually Sigmund Freud, who was a Jew himself, he was an Austrian Jew, he was a strong critic of Theodor Herzl and the Zionist movement, as I learned. I think that's the case, actually. I'm quite sure, by the way. Why were people criticizing Zionism? Because Zionism was an ideology which was built upon frozen grief, which led to the occupation of Palestine, 1948, and what we call the Al-Nakba, a catastrophe where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were either killed, massacred, genocided, or removed from their ancestry home. And that's how the state of Israel was founded, by Zionist ideology and thought. This was, colonization. The way that the Europeans colonized North America, the Caribbean, South America, most parts of Africa, most parts of the Muslim world, and also beyond in Asia, Australia, New Zealand. That's how this whole thing happened, 1948, and even before. All right. This is really good example of frozen grief, because the Jewish people have been oppressed in Europe for thousands of years. This is something we can recognize. Anti-Semitism has been real, and it's still real. There exists anti-Semitism. We do admit that. There is racism towards Jews and towards Roma people. There is racism towards Muslims and Black people and many other people. The whole Inquisition, which was done by the Christians who colonized Spain, which was back then under Muslim control, which we call the Great Era of Al-Andalus. During 700 years, the Muslim was governing the Spanish Peninsula and Portugal, where they, in a just way, where Muslims and Jews and Christians were living side by side. It was an interfaith dialogue between them. Knowledge and scholarly work was thriving, and the Jewish people were in the safeguard of the Muslims, actually, of the Muslims throughout these 700 years. Those who were part of the Spanish Inquisition, they came to Al-Andalus, modern Spain, and the Spanish Peninsula, which includes Portugal as well. And by the way, Portugal means orange, and it's a word that we use in Arabic and Persian and Urdu, etc. So it's actually a lot of the words, a lot of the names of the cities in Spain are Muslim names, actually. Nevertheless, when these extreme Christians came, and they were like extremists, right? Like the Crusaders, they massacred all the Muslims and the Jews, and they expelled the Muslims from modern-day Spain. Some of the Jews that were left there, and then they started to, move and flee all around Europe, they were, throughout the 1,000 years afterwards, heavily discriminated. The whole word of ghetto, for instance, brothers and sisters, we call neighborhoods that are disenfranchised for ghettos. Ghettos were the neighborhood the neighborhoods where the Jews were living were called ghettos. They didn't have access to water. They were really treated as second citizens. Second citizens. So the experience of the Jews in Europe were horrific. In the Muslim lands, the country, actually, the Jews found safe havens in the Muslim lands. In Morocco, for instance, Jews were living side by side with Muslims for thousands of years, and they thrived. And this is something that a lot of Jewish scholars can mention that are not Zionists, by the way. So there is a grief for the Jewish people. They've been through a lot of suffering, right? And then we have the Holocaust, right? The annihilation and the killing of millions of Jews, and not only Jews, Roma people and political opponents of the Nazis were annihilated in the Holocaust, whether it's in Auschwitz and in Poland or in other concentration camps. So the Jewish people have been through a lot of suffering. Now, what Zionism represents, dear brothers and sisters, is frozen, unprocessed grief. Because what happened after the Second World War, when the Zionist movement, thanks to the British, by the way, who were the colonizers of Palestine, who just gave a land where millions of people lived to people that never lived there, just gave it. This is colonization for sure. Nevertheless, from 1948 and beyond, with the establishment of the State of Israel, which is a Zionist project, by the way, you see what happens when you don't process grief. What is the result of frozen grief and unprocessed grief? And this is very important, brothers and sisters, right? If you don't process the grief that you've been through, in the Jewish case, you can speak about the 1,000 years of discrimination that the Jewish diaspora faced in Europe, and particularly in Europe, and also other parts of the world, right? Then if you get power, if you don't process your grief, if you've been oppressed, you might become the oppressor, which is the situation now in Palestine, where the Palestinian people are being oppressed by the Zionist ideology and occupation and colonization, right? The settler colonization. This is a result of frozen grief, unprocessed grief, which is Zionism. And some notions that we hear from a lot of the Zionist leaders today, they say what happened to us, and with us they mean what they define as the Jewish people, should never happen to us again, which means, okay, it should not happen to us again, but we can do it towards others, because what they're doing towards the Palestinians is what they experienced in Europe for 1,000 years, right? But then there are other people, and specifically other Jewish representatives that are not Zionists, that are critical towards Zionism. A lot of Jewish people are critical towards Zionism, like Gabor Mate, one of the great Jewish Canadian psychologists. We are looking forward to inviting him to ISIP to do lectures. He's an amazing, amazing scholar. But also one of my favorites, and also Sister Fatima's favorite, my colleague, Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a Jewish psychologist who survived the Holocaust. And he was a really critique. He was very critical towards the Zionist movement. And what he did was that through the grief he went through the trial and tribulation he went through, he processed it psychologically, and he created a whole therapeutic model called logotherapy, meaning-making therapy. And actually, Sister Fatima, my colleague, and myself, and one of my teachers, Dr. Yusuf Jahab, we have written an article about how to utilize Islamic psychology and also logotherapy to work with post-traumatic growth. And inshallah, this article will be published soon, and we will share it with all of you participants, inshallah. So what Viktor Frankl did is that he found meaning with the suffering he went through, and that is to process the grief in a healthy way. And he created a therapeutic modality, which is a meaning-making therapy, to make meaning out of your trials and tribulation, which is very congruent to how we view trials and tribulation from an Islamic psychological lens. And Viktor Frankl and other Jewish people that are critical towards Zionism, they used to say, what happened to us as Jews should never happen anybody else again. You see the difference? The Zionists say what happened to us should never happen us again, and that's why they're massacring and genociding our beloved Palestinian brothers and sisters. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give freedom and justice to the Palestinian brothers and sisters. So they say what happened to us should never happen to us again. What did other people who processed the grief, like Viktor Frankl and Gabor Mate and other excellent colleagues say? What happened to us should never happen anybody else, counting in the Palestinians, the African diaspora, the Rohingyas, the Uyghurs, etc., etc. So Zionism is an example, beloved brothers and sisters, of frozen grief. Now let me give you guys an example of processed grief and resilience. This is a picture painted which refers to the siege of Baghdad. The siege of Baghdad 1258. So when the Abbasids were ruling the Muslim world, they had their center and the capital in Baghdad, the capital of modern-day Iraq. All right? This was the center of education, medicine, knowledge, and all over the world. People from all over the world came to Baghdad to study. This was the jewel of the civilization of the world back then. When the Mughals, the army of Genghis Khan invaded the whole Middle East, they massacred millions of people and destroyed all cities in modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. Imagine the people living in Baghdad when they were sieged and occupied and then massacred by the Mongol invasion. They could also go to something that could be frozen grief if they didn't process it properly. What happened instead, which is quite astonishing, brothers and sisters, if you think about that, is that people found meaning with the trials and tribulation that they went through with the Mughal invasion. I mean, the Mughals destroyed the whole Middle East. They burned down the libraries of Baghdad. There is sayings from contemporary historians who lived through the Mughal siege, 1258, where they said that the river of Tigris, which is the river that surrounds Baghdad, was filled with red and black color. Red of the blood of the martyrs who passed away, and black of the ink of all the books that was destroyed. Subhanallah. Even then, the Muslims and the people back then, they found meaning with the trial that they went through. This is a picture, my beloved colleagues and brothers and sisters, of Ibn Khaldun, one of the great Islamic scholars of our tradition, the father of sociology, we say. Ibn Khaldun actually did dawah and met Timur-Lenk. Timur-Lenk was one of the descendants of Genghis Khan, and he was the leader of the Mughal Empire back then. Timur-Lenk actually became a Muslim. So this is the interesting thing. Just the second and third generation of the descendants of Genghis Khan became Muslims. Imagine 1258 when Baghdad was sieged and occupied by the Mughals. I don't think people then thought that the grandchildren of the occupiers will become Muslims, but they were making dua. They were making dawah. And Ibn Khaldun is seen here making dawah to Timur-Lenk to bring him to Islam. He was a Muslim, but he was still quite pagan in his practices. Come to Islam. Actually, Timur-Lenk's last name, Lenk, is a Persian word for the person who halts, because he used to halt when he walked. So the dawah of Ibn Khaldun, the du'as of those who were under the siege of the Mughal invasion, led actually, beloved brothers and sisters, to the descendants of Genghis Khan, just the second and third generation, to become Muslims. And they became actually the endorsers of the Islamic civilization, education, and high culture. And the spread of Islam to modern-day India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan was partially done by the Mughals, which established the Mughal Empire. All right? Could you please mute yourself? Sister Fatima, please mute the microphone, please. Thank you. So, could you please mute the microphone? Fatima, please, dear Sister Fatima, mute the microphone, please. Thank you so much. So the descendants of the Mughals, of Genghis Khan, became Muslims and spread Islam to what we call Bilad al-Hindustan, the Mughal Empire. So many of our colleagues, like for instance, Sister Fatima, the co-founder of ISIP, many of our colleagues in ISIP's Indian chapter, Pakistani chapter, Bengali chapter, many of you who are of Indian or Pakistani or Bengali descendant, or you live in India or Pakistan or Bangladesh, or you're part of the diaspora, Islam came partially to the region due to the Mughals. So what does this mean, brothers and sisters? This is a really important thing to speak about. What this means is that, just one second, brothers and sisters, is that we should always have hope and make dua, So how we historically perceived and responded to suffering We saw it as an epiphany, an epiphenomena of something deeper, which was accessed through firasa, which means profound understanding that everything surrenders to Allah's divine decree, nothing outside of his control. So, for example, in the aftermath of the Mughal destruction, Muslims and the people who were living in Baghdad and the whole Muslim world, they responded by re-spiritualizing themselves. And this is actually something that some of my teachers were speaking about with regards to the situation in Baghdad and in the Muslim world during the Mughal invasion, re-spiritualization. I want to actually we can briefly go through this slide as well. It's just comparing the Islamic versus the Christian notion of man, and what differentiate, because our modern era are very influenced by Judeo-Christian notions. So it's quite interesting to reflect upon it, that in the Christian thought, man is being created with a sin. People are born with a sin, and dunya, in a sense, is a punishment for the original sin. And by believing in Jesus and that he sacrificed it himself, then you will be purified from your sin. This is just, briefly. This is a very, it needs to be defined even more, but just very briefly. The Islamic way of looking at man, the notion of man, is that dunya, the world, and its duality is part of our trajectory to understand and appreciate the felicity of Jannah and pure fitri witnessing. Jannah means paradise. So we as Muslims, we don't believe that we're born with a sin. We don't believe in that. Christian theology speaks about Adam as falling to earth with sin. We, in the Islamic theology, speak about Adam, alayhi salam, Prophet Adam, and mankind by extension, because Adam is our father, was created in Jannah. Adam was created in Jannah and sent to earth to understand the original state of mankind. So that's Adam who came to earth, and then we're the descendants of Adam. So there's a little bit difference between the Christian notion theologically about the ontological reality of man with the Islamic notion. And why I mention it is because our world today is very influenced by Judeo-Christian notions, even though we live in a secular world, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, but even in the whole world. So understanding suffering and theodicy in dunya from a fitri-centric lens. So it's important to understand that the modern Western society is a fight, flight, and freeze society. All right? What do I mean with that? The psychological aspect of fight, flight, and freeze is very important. So what is fight, flight, and freeze, dear brothers and sisters? So in developmental psychology and what they call evolution psychology, we speak about human beings as hunterers, always being in a fight, flight, freeze mode, and that we have that inherent in our nature as human beings as well. So for instance, when an enemy comes, either you want to fight the enemy, or you want to flee from the threat and the enemy, or you get frozen when you are, meeting the threat, as a way, because you can't handle it, So what we should do, who believe in Islamic psychology, who apply Islamic psychology, we should actually speak about mindful hijrah versus nafsani hijrah, all right? So if we are doing a nafsani hijrah, which is that we are acting upon our nafs, our ego, then when a trial and tribulation comes, we're fleeing from the predestination, the qadr of Allah, or we will deny it by fighting qadr Allah and the predestination, or we will be so paralyzed that we will be frozen because we're not able to handle predestination, qadr Allah, and will of Allah. This is nafsani hijrah, the fight, flight, and freeze, which is something we see in our modern society. We don't want to see trials and tribulation. We just zap our TVs when we see something bad on TV, and we just change it to something else. This is something that is quite common in our modern society. But from an Islamic psychological perspective, we should actually do freeze. But it's to be with the pain, not to be in frozen pain or frozen grief, but to be mindfully freezing, to be with the pain, to contemplate about the pain, not to fight it, not to be frozen in a way where you're paralyzed and you can't get any meaning out of it. And we should fight by fighting our nafs, our ego, that doesn't accept the will of Allah, qadr Allah. And then the suffering and the flight is to flee, not from the pain, but seek refuge in qadr Allah, in the predestination and will of Allah. Seek refuge to Allah. So instead of being a refugee from qadr Allah, predestination, we become a citizen of Qadarullah. And the nafs, the nafs has three stages, like nafs al-amara bil-su, which is the nafs that is inclined to evil, nafs al-lawama, which is the reproachable self, and nafs al-mutmainna, which is the serene self, the serene soul. Then we can take through this practice, which is purification of the self, tazkiyat the nafs, we can come from nafs, take the nafs from amara to mutmainna, or at least lawama. And the flight is the flight from the nafs, and with sabr and patience comes ease because we mindfully normalize the suffering. And new wisdom and hikmah comes with time in a state of mindful suluk and wayfaring. All right? So understanding suffering and theodicy in dunya from a fitri-centric lens. So from a fitri therapeutic approach to theodicy, we can approach fight, flight, and freeze from a fitri lens. So for instance, without suffering, we cannot appreciate the sweetness of the blessings that we see. Enter in a state of hafla, and forgetfulness is not good, so we overlook and take our blessings for granted. And that's why our worldly dunyavi experiences can leave us with a distorted perspective of what the concept of pure transcendental love is. So we're not asking Allah to make us suffer, rather we accept it. So, brothers and sisters, before I end, and I just have a couple of slides left, how do we as fellow brothers and sisters and human beings, as mental health professionals, or as just Muslims, or even non-Muslims, and we have non-Muslims in the session today, most welcome to the lecture and honored to have you with us. How do we treat people who are suffering? All the things that I spoke with you guys today, this is the theory. What we need to communicate the theory with ihsan, with beauty, all right? Because as we grow and achieve metacognition or tafakkur, contemplation, we begin to understand the hikmah, wisdom of things, to think about your thoughts and feelings rather than acting upon them. So when we give guidance, it should be with compassion-oriented focus. This is very important. So if, for instance, you have a client as a mental health professional, and he or she is in a deep state of depression, they might have difficulty to understand why they are going through all this suffering. And then it's important for us to be pedagogical, mindful, and mentalize the client's disposition. This is very important, and this is a reminder for myself first and foremost. The severity of the trials that people have faced or are facing is real. Don't minimize them. Don't bypass them. So humanizing the experience rather than theologically preach about it is very important. And to humanize our way of approaching theodicy therapeutically from a fitra-centric lens is crucial. We shouldn't be judgmental with the ifs and the why question that people are asking those who are going through suffering and pain. Rather, trying to mentalize and understand them or the client as the questioner while providing guidance. And do not spiritually bypass anyone who's going through trials and tribulation, including yourself, brothers and sisters. Be with the pain rather than rejecting it. We should not look at Islamic theology as a verdict, rather as a guideline. We should be supportive and acknowledge people's suffering without questioning qadar Allah and predestination and will of Allah. We should break the stigma of seeking professional mental health support. We should mirror themselves through ourselves as reference points. And we should definitely advocate for mindful freezing instead of pathological freezing, which I mentioned in the earlier slide, to endorse acceptance step by step. It's not easy to accept in the beginning when you lost a lot of things in life. But maybe with time, we can help to facilitate that process. And labels like being a refugee, for example, which is a trauma, is a status in the end of the day, and it's not a condition, in most cases, by the way. Healing journey towards becoming the citizen of Qadr Allah. And as we know, my beloved brothers and sisters and colleagues, the prophets and the Anbiya were tested the most. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, said, if Allah wills good for someone, he afflicts him with trials. This is just the nature of life. Now, attention, brothers and sisters. Be aware of how you give nasiyah, which I said. And I just want to briefly speak about the concept of spiritual bypassing. So, the effect of wrong nasihah advice in relation to how to deal with trials can lead can also lead to destructive consequences and can be related to the concept of spiritual bypassing, which is the tendency to use spiritual ideas and concepts to bypass or avoid facing unresolved emotional problems, psychological wounds, and unfinished trauma processing, mainly to avoid rather than work through the pain. All right? And the consequences, brothers and sisters, of spiritual bypassing can manifest in many forms, such as extreme detachment, numbing and repressing one's emotions, the inability to allow negative emotions, and an over-rational way of seeing the world, relegating emotional feelings to the subconscious as a way to establish a so-called sanctuary. And when Ibrahim, the son of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, died, he wept, the Prophet, and he said, and this is a good reminder for myself and all of us, dear brothers and sisters. The Prophet said, verily the eyes shed tears and the heart mourns, and we are saddened by your departure, O Ibrahim, but we will not say anything but what pleases our Lord. So what we see with this hadith, this saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, is that the Prophet, peace be upon him, he embodies healthy grief processing. Even though he always accepted qadar Allah, he cried, he mourned, whether when he lost his wife, Khadija radiallahu anha, or his son, Ibrahim. He cried, and it's okay to cry. We need to allow people to grieve. This is healthy. It doesn't mean that you're questioning qadarullah, but you just wait and accept the pain. This is my final slide, dear brothers and sisters, and actually a very brief presentation of the concept of sumud and resilience. This is an infographic that my colleagues at ISIP's design team, Sister Madiha, Brother Ali, Sister Beza, also Sister Fatima, the rest of the excellent team in ISIP and Al-Balkhi Institute, they established, quoting Dr. Sama Jabbar, which is one of the leading Palestinian psychologists working in Palestine. And we had a lecture with her, I think a month or 1.5 months ago, where she was speaking about the notion of sumud. All right? So Palestinian vocabulary, sumud is part of the vocabulary of Arabic and specifically in Palestine, which people start to use through the Nakba, the catastrophe in 1948, the 1967 and 1973 wars, all the way through the Intifada to today. Often translated as resilience, Dr. Sama Jabbar, head of the mental health unit at the Palestinian Ministry of Health, defines it as a combination of endurance and steadfastness, both individual and collectively. Sumud is a mental state as well as being action-oriented. It is defiance against oppression, subhanAllah. And it's exactly what we have spoken about in my presentation today. And there are different components of sumud. So it's important to have a pro-social, community-centered sohbah and companionship to allow resilience to come. It's important to bring endurance and steadfastness, but also to show compassion towards yourself and others. This is a way to show defiance against oppression and occupation and colonization, which the Palestinians are now facing. May Allah make it easy. A way to form solidarity and companionship. And it keeps involving love despite injustice. Love. My beloved brothers and sisters, this was my last slide. Thank you so much for listening. Please forgive me for any shortcomings from my presentation. If I said anything wrong or presented anything in an edited way, rest assured that all the mistakes are solidly mine. And if anything good came from this presentation, it's all from Allah Azza wa Jal, and all the mistakes are solidly mine. Thank you so much for joining us, dear brothers and sisters. I have so much to learn from all of you, honestly. You are all the sources of knowledge for me. I want to thank my colleagues and Sister Fatima, Sister Nadir, and the rest of the team for the amazing work you guys are doing. It's an honor to be with all of you, and I'm looking forward for all of your questions right now. This is my contact details. If you want to reach out to me, my email address, my WhatsApp number, please join our WhatsApp groups for resource sharing, which Sister Fatima, Sister Nadira has shared in the Zoom chat. And if you guys need any lectures connected to this for your, initiatives or associations and where you guys are living all over the world, I'm happy to do it. Of course, I'm at your service. And if you guys know anybody who needs support with counseling or whatever, feel free to reach out to us in ISIP. We have a lot of counselors that are working with post-traumatic growth from an Islamic psychological point of view, and we're happy to facilitate those connections for you. And I'm also at your service as counselor as well, and all of my colleagues. We have right now soon, we're establishing the ISIP, a counseling services called Rafiq Counseling, where we will offer this services. So if you guys know anybody who needs help, please reach out to us in ISIP, and my colleagues and myself who are trained will be at your service, inshallah. So I will stop sharing my screen, and I will open now for any questions, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan. Thank you so much for listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I just wanted to personally and on behalf of everyone who is here, thank Brother Seyed Jamaluddin. Inshallah, we can show our appreciation. I know there's a lot of comments coming in through the chat. Thank you so much, Jamaluddin, for sharing with us today. I really I appreciate it, and I think it's extremely relevant, bringing in the concept and looking at even, the concept of Zionism and the history behind that, and connecting that perhaps in a psychological way to frozen grief. So thank you. There's been so many gems and so many things that you've shared with us today that, again, that I'm sure will take some time for everyone to process. And I know that it's been very well received. There's a lot of comments coming in, alhamdulillah. In terms of questions, we haven't had any, but if I may, I don't mind actually asking a question. Just when you were talking about mindful freezing, I think was the term that you used. And are there any kind of like practical examples of how someone can perhaps stay with that pain that you were kind of mentioning, and not to avoid that, like some practical examples that you might want to share with us, or that you personally find helpful?
Thank you for an excellent question, Sister Fatima. It's a very important question, and it's not easy, in all honesty. And there is not one way of doing this. It's really difficult. It's really difficult. It's a struggle, even for myself, even though I'm a therapist, I'm a counselor, I studied, I'm trained, I have difficulties, and everybody has. And that's why it's important to be compassionate towards yourself. Acknowledge that you have pain. It's okay. You're not less of a man or a woman if you have pain. Quite the contrary. You're just human. Pain makes you human. That's the difference between us and angels. Angels don't suffer. They don't experience pain, but then they don't have free will either. Through our free will, pain comes, but also free will gives us joy, right? And it's very important to have that in mind. And also, when you feel pain, be with it for the moment. Sometimes we try to deny it, but it will come back, maybe in a week, maybe in 1 year, through psychosomatic illnesses. Why is it that a lot of people have, like, for instance, I'm generalizing now, but men and women, we tend to grieve differently. And I'm generalizing because not all men are like that and not all women are like that, all right? Women tend to internalize pain, Men tend to externalize pain, all right? And I'm generalizing, all right? So please forgive me. It's not like 100%, but I'm just to prove a point or bring a point to a place. And I'm open to change my mind either. Yeah, also. What I would say is we need a balanced approach. We should be with it, but still externalize it as well. So if we look at the feminine and masculine way of doing it, it should be a combination. And when, for instance, we take women, for instance, and even men, there is like this psychosomatic ailment called fibromyalgia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it okay in English.
Fibromyalgia, yeah.
Fibromyalgia. I'm sorry, I'm not a native English speaker.
That's fine. Yeah.
So most fibromyalgia, people who have fibromyalgia are women, actually. This is research on it. Why? This is a psychosomatic illness, and people still don't know the cause. But one of the theories is that it's unprocessed grief and not externalizing or labeling the trauma that instead goes into the body. And then you get like joints that hurts. So it goes into your body. So even if you deny the trauma, it will come to your body through headache, through fibromyalgia, through IBS, irritated bowel syndrome, through other, things, right? And the same with men. Why is it that so many men die so early in life, earlier than women? Because we tend to externalize it by aggression, full ghadab and anger, which is bad. Instead of being with it and maybe after label it in a more healthy, balanced way. So Just because you're not mindfully accepting it or being with the pain doesn't mean that it disappears. It will come again in 1 year. You might see it in your relationship with others. You might have difficulty to build rapport with others. So allow the pain to absorb you for a while, but don't let it take over your whole world, because then you will be paralyzed. I often say, give 1 day to be with it. Even ask the questions. Why? For a while. But after a while, you will not rationally always understand. This is impossible. We're not Allah. Allah understands everything. We don't. We're deficient as creation, as human beings. Ask the why and if for a while, but then after that, understand that your health will not come by you rationally understanding, because you won't always rationally understand injustice, for instance. And then leave it and just be with the pain. Then you did your best. You tried to understand. For instance, we're trying to understand the occupation in the world, colonization. But if we're only thinking colonization, or occupation, after a while, we will, it will take over our whole world, and we will not be able to be, fathers or mothers, or, having our daily lives, etc. Right? So it's important to acknowledge it, to ask questions, to study for a while about your pain, trying to get that resolvement, but then just be with it as well. Be with it. And with time, I can almost promise you, but Allahu A'lam, you will see that it will become less severe, because after a while, you will regain energy, and you will acquire new life experiences that will let this trauma, after a while, come into the periphery of your focal point. All right, with time. But it's time. It's time, waqt, and it's sabr, patience, and endurance. And also remember one thing. The oppressed can be an oppressor if they don't deal with their grief and trauma. We as Muslims can also become oppressors. That's why the Prophet, peace be upon him, is the best example of how to deal with grief. What happened with Allah, Azza wa Jal, gave the Prophet Fath, opening of Mecca. Did he go and kill his enemies? No, he forgave them. And many of them became the best companions who spread Islam all over the world. This is a lesson for us, just to look at the biography and the seerah of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and also the situation with the Mughals, right, which I mentioned. So have it in your mind that you never know if your enemy will become your friend in the future. So make dua. Somebody wrote dua in the chat. Make dua. But be with the pain. Accept that you have pain. You're not less of a man or a woman. That will be one of my nasiha, of course. But it's not easy, and that's for sure. Allahu Akbar.
Barakallahu fikum. Thank you so much. And I hear that, and perhaps it's just, again, something that we're trying to push through. So we're trying to look for ways to not lessen it, but then the lesson is to actually just sit in it and just acknowledge it. And as you said, to just name it, that I'm in pain. Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, one thing you said, Sister Fatima, which is amazing, and mashallah, you're so knowledgeable in this, so you're more knowledgeable than me. Labeling it, it's so important. And pick a friend. Like I always, when I go through trials and tribulations, I have a couple of friends that I trust, I speak out with them. Or go to a therapist, of course, that's also good, but sometimes I have a friend. So pick a companion. This is what Imam Ghazali says. If you don't find a righteous teacher, then have a friend that could be of guidance for you. Pick a friend that you trust and speak with them. Sometimes just speaking with someone for an hour and you just get it out of your system gives you relief. So that's also very good guidance.
Thank you. We've had a couple of comments that I'll just read as well, related to this particular question and your answer here. Crying is a good method. Someone said staying with the pain is difficult, but it helps a lot. And then also talking to someone. So thank you to all of the participants for sharing those as well. Brother Jamaluddin, there's a couple of questions related to, because mashallah, you have done the Cambridge Muslim College and the TIIP. So Brother Isnan is asking a question in terms of getting educated in Islamic psychology, contemplating to take the diploma program at CMC or TIIP.
So essentially, if brothers and sisters, if you guys can ask mostly questions about the lecture today, that will be a benefit. But I will answer this question, and it's a very important question. So my answer will be that if you go to ISIP's website, you can see many of the programs offered in Islamic psychology. I highly recommend both the Cambridge Muslim College and the TIIP. These are two excellent modalities to study. And if you want to apply for them, feel free to email us and we can give you all the details of how we can apply. Essentially, CMC's program is a one-year online program, and they offer scholarship. You can always apply for it. In order to be able to do the program, you need to be a mental health professional. So you need to be a licensed counselor or psychotherapist or psychologist or psychiatrist or have some professional background in mental health. So that's the program. It's an amazing program with some of the leading scholars who are, teaching it. So I highly recommend it. The TIP program is also an amazing program, and it's a modality where you train to utilize a specific methodology that has been established by Dr. Keshavarzi, Dr. Khan, and Dr. Zemzem, and other excellent scholars and practitioners. And the CMC was established by Dr. Rothman and Dr. Bedri, by the way, some of the leading scholars as well. So essentially, it's 3 levels that you can do. Level 1 is a 1-week program where you need to travel to Istanbul, Turkey to do it. But they also offer it now in Australia, I think in Pakistan, and even in North America. And level 2 is also 1-week program. And after that, you go through supervision and practice for about 5 to 9 months. So I highly recommend both modalities. And there are other modalities as well in Islamic psychology, which are excellent. And you can see the list of all these modalities at ISIP's website, inshallah.
Yeah, thank you. There's a question here by Sister Salma on how to deal with the guilt of being in grief when the environment often blames the sadness.
Yeah, I understand the question. So the environment you need to find, yeah, that's a great question. Who was the questioner?
Salma.
That's an amazing question. MashaAllah, thank you. And that's really a challenge because we as human beings are not just individuals. We're part of a collective. And if the collective doesn't understand that pain is a natural part of being a human, then spiritual bypassing comes. And then suddenly you could be blamed of feeling sadness. And that's really difficult. So we need to work with psychoeducation and advocacy. That's why we established ISIP actually as a way to advocate for speaking about mental health and break the stigma. And it's okay to feel low, be sad. It's okay. It's part of being a human. And actually, if you accept it and you go through it, then you will come out strong. If you don't accept it and you don't go through the grief, then you might get pathologies on a later stage in life. So I think my recommendation will be try to find good sohbah, good circles where you can be yourself and be with the pain, and where people can accept you for being in that stage in your life. If you don't have it in your close circles and your family, then at least try to find it somewhere where you can have like a safe haven. We all need a safe haven where we can recharge ourselves. And I often say when you try to put a mask in front of others, that's double the burden. Because one, you need to keep that mask alive that you're feeling well, and then you're suffering at the same time. To just be with the suffering is just one burden. To pretend that you're not suffering is to add more burden on your shoulders, and it will not help you in your healing trajectory. So my guidance there, your sister, is to find good companionship where you can be yourself, safe spaces, like what we're doing, like Sister Fatima together with Sister Kenza and other excellent colleagues are doing this resilience circle every Sunday. This is a safe space for you guys to just be with the pain. So we need to build this type of infrastructure, and inshallah that you can create that in your own community as well. But definitely sadness is part of life. You're not less of a man or a woman. And it's part of the nature of our soul. Why do we cry when we hear melancholic sounds? That reminds you of something in life, because this is part of our nature. And tears are amazing. Crying is amazing. When I do counseling session with my clients and I see some of them cry, I often tell them, this is a blessing from Allah, because these tears that are coming down from your eyes and running down your cheek are like small diamonds that you should capture and put it in your pocket and save them. It's a way to restore balance and mizan in yourself spiritually, physically, and biologically and psychologically. It's really to cleanse yourself. And that's why we cry when we think about some of the struggles that the Prophet said and go through. We cry. When we listen to nasheed, sometimes we cry. When we hear ayat from Quran, we sometimes cry. It's healthy. And specifically for men, because we're not trained in this society to cry, because the whole notion of masculinity in this modern era is an errored one. And it's a cultural thing, has nothing to do with our deen, which, you know, the hadith of the Prophet when he was crying, peace be upon him, when he lost his son, is a testifies that we as men, we need to allow ourselves to cry a little bit more. And we need to train our young sons to be able to cry. I remember I met a parent. I was doing like a lecture, and we were speaking about parenting and tarbiyah. And I'm not perfect, by the way. I have so much struggles myself. I have so much shortcomings, rest assured. I always say that to everyone, you know, like, why do you become a counselor? Because you struggle. That's the fact. So nobody is perfect. But I was reminded when I heard like somebody said to a young boy, man up, don't cry. And I was like, that's actually not good. That's almost torture. You need to allow this young boy to cry. Learn him to cry. No, it's balance and everything. We shouldn't, you know, crying too much is not good either, right? So it's about finding balance. But able yourself to feel that sadness is to feel your humanity. It's to actually accept qadar Allah. Allah doesn't want you to be happy when somebody is dying. So by actually crying is to accept qadar Allah. You see what I'm saying? By denouncing it is actually, I mean, you can still accept qadar Allah. I mean, different people grieve in different ways. Some people doesn't cry, but they grieve in another way, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying that everybody should cry. But what I'm saying, it's a way of accepting qadar Allah by actually accepting that you're sad. Because you're not, maybe you're questioning qadar Allah. Allahu A'lam.
Barakallahu fikum. Thank you so much. And I think that I really appreciated the point about, you know, our role collectively to try and normalize, you know, the stages of grief, for example, or, you know, that it's okay to be sad, it's okay to cry. And I think that's a collective, you know, duty that when we're trying to, you know, build that collective awareness and normalization of that. So thank you for that. There's still, I'm mindful of the time, Jamaluddin. We're a little bit over, but there's maybe one or two more questions.
I'm here. I know that you need to go, Fatima, so I'm mindful of your. I'm here. I mean, I don't. I can be here for 10, 15 minutes more. If you need to go, I can even address the questions myself. So that's fine.
Sister Aisha, it's kind of, I think, a follow-up to one of the previous questions about, sorry, I'm just trying to find it. Where did it go? Oh yeah, frozen grief. So again, the concept of frozen grief that leads to aggression as it's happening with Zionism. How can one manage the frozen grief besides acknowledging it and sitting with it for a day at least?
I mean, a day is just an example. I think sometimes you need to sit with it for generations, in all honesty. Some of the traumas we go through, like colonization, is still there. It's real. It's not like it's in the past, which we see in Palestine, by the way. So when I said one day, I was speaking generally. If there are levels of grief and levels of traumas, by the way, you know. So, and sometimes people feel sad. How can I feel bad when these people are going through so much more struggles? But it's not a competition when it comes to going through grief. All right, we shouldn't compete. If you lose your cat and that cat means a lot to you, grieve it. It doesn't mean that you're questioning that other people can have even harder loss, of course, but it doesn't mean that you're not allowed to feel pain just because you might have a more privileged position than somebody else. This is not an Olympics, you know. This is not. Pain is pain. We should never minimize it. Now, how to not be stuck in frozen grief. I gave the example of how our Muslims traditionally tend to do it. And this was actually one of my teachers, Sheikh Abdullah Murad, who mentioned this to me, and I'm quoting him. He said that the people in Baghdad, after the siege of the Mughals, they re-spiritualized themselves. They were never questioning Allah. They found spiritual meaning. And actually, if you look at it, I have another example. I didn't mention it because it will take 30 minutes more to mention it. But if you look at, for instance, a lot of the martyrs that we have, they're actually alive. And they're more alive than what we are. For us as Muslim, death is not, the physical death is just a physical death. It's not a spiritual death. That's why it's important also that we actually always respect the aura of the physical dead body, because the person is still alive in a sense. That's why we shouldn't, I always say to people, don't watch too many pictures of people being mutilated and stuff if you can't handle it, because it will affect your mental health. You know that this is going on. You don't need to see it. And it's also a way for us to, I mean, we should, of course, share the pictures because we need to do advocacy. But if you're sensitive, don't watch it. You still know that it's happening. It's also, we need to respect the aura, because these people are alive. Martyrs are alive. We believe in martyrhood. Other people are alive. And we know people that are dying under Rumble, they're martyrs. This is a statement from the Prophet. So people are alive. And our life doesn't end here. And martyrs are granted Jannah. They're in a higher spiritual state than what we are. So in a sense, we need to also accept the fact that frozen grief comes from not understanding, for instance, that you shouldn't be absorbed by aggression. If aggression fuels your resistance, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be pissed off because of what's happening now with our Palestinian brothers and sisters. I'm pissed off. I'm sure you guys are pissed off. Or what's happening to our Rohingyas brothers and sisters. We have Brother Muhammad here. By the way, Fatima, we need to help Brother Muhammad. He's reaching out to me, so we need to do something for the Rohingyas. Or what's happening with the Uyghur Muslims. Or, I'm sorry, there are so many people all over the world. Roma people, what they've been through for thousands of years with genocides and everything. Nevertheless. But our main goal is not to resolve it with aggression. Of course, to self-defense is a just act. And what the Palestinians are doing, they're protecting themselves. They're the occupied. Even according to Geneva Convention, the occupied and the oppressed are allowed to defend themselves. So what happens here is that when aggression fuels, then we will start to see things black and white. For instance, you can easily become anti-Semitic. No, many Jews are against Zionism. Many Jews are against Zionism. We have some of our best critiques of the Zionist policies from the Jewish people, like Gabor Mate, and I hope we can invite him to ISIP. I know that he is one of our favorite non-Muslim psychologists. Or Viktor Frankl. Imagine if the Prophet came to Mecca again with the fact and had just aggression in his eyes. He will massacre everybody there. He actually forgave them because his ambition was not fueled by anger. It was fueled by the wisdom of Allah, which was compassion. And we need to differentiate between the action, or we say the sin and the sinner. The action and the person because the person who does the action can always do tawbah. And ask for Allah's mercy. I mean, look at Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu. Before he became a Muslim, he killed a lot of the Muslims. And then he became a Muslim and he became one of the best Muslims. And the Prophet said, when you do tawbah and you're a convert or revert to Islam, for instance, then you're forgiven. And he became the sword of Allah. He became the sword of God. That's the nickname, right? That he had, that the Prophet gave him. So this is in our tradition. So don't allow your resistance, and I'm not speaking for people that are oppressed. I don't have any rights to speak for the Palestinians. I don't have any rights. I give all the rights to the Palestinian people. I'm generally speaking. So take me from a general point of view. Don't connect it just to one issue, right? Even though Palestine is absorbing all of us, because Palestine is for whole humanity, the whole issue. If we are observed by aggression, we will be stuck. That's why tawbah is important, forgiveness. And actually, for the oppressed to forgive is healthy for their heart, and for the oppressor to forgive is healthy for their heart. Of course, it needs to be just. You cannot just ask forgiveness and then still keep all the things you took. You need to give back, right? So it needs to be justice connected to it. And that's also one of the 5 steps of tawbah. One is to give back to those you did something unjust to. That's one aspect of tawbah, right? And tawbah is towards Allah. Allah is the most forgiving. People might not be forgiving. This is also something you need to be mindful. Don't do tawbah because you want the benefit for people to forgive you. Do tawbah because you're doing for Allah, and it's just to ask forgiveness to others. And if humans can forgive, it's up to them. But we endorse forgiveness. So it's important that we learn from the history that the oppressed can become the oppressor if he or she doesn't work with himself. And we don't want to become oppressors as Muslims. We want to open up. We want to open up hearts. Our biggest fight is with the heart. The jihad al-akbar is jihad al-nafs. The greatest jihad is the jihad of breaking your nafs and your ego. So we want to purify ourselves. And the best way of fighting is through muhabbat, is to love. But of course, there is a saying, from Masnavi of Rumi, mashallah. Rumi quotes, I mention this often when I do lectures, but I want to mention because it's very relevant. He's quoting Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu when he's fighting a warrior. May Allah preserve all of the Sahaba. I mean, when we read about Sahaba, you start to cry. These are amazing people. I wish they were here with us now. They will help us so much. But they're with us in their stories. So Ali has a double-edged sword. Why? Why does it have two edges? Because one edge is to do jihad with your nafs, fight your nafs, and the other edge is to defend yourself in dunya, self-defense. So the warrior meets Ali, radiallahu anhu, and he spits at his face. Ali, Ali is a strong man. He's raised by the Prophet ﷺ. He's strong spiritually, physically, psychologically, emotionally. He takes, and he's about to give him a blow and kill him. Suddenly he does tazkiyat al-nafs, purifying his intention, and he does some contemplation, tafakkur, muraqabah, introspection. Am I killing this man because of my nafs, that he insulted me, or am I doing it for Allah? When he understood he's doing it because of his ego, he brought down the sword and he forgave the warrior. And the later history is the warrior became a Muslim because of this act. And this is mentioned in the Masnavi of Rumi, rahimahullah. That's the way we should act. Of course, self-defense is inevitable, of course, and we need to. There are just ways where we resist, and sometimes you need to use force. But this is the last thing we do as Muslims. This is the last resort. We should do all resorts before. May Allah allow us all to learn from our Sahaba and our predecessors.
Ameen ya Rab. Ameen ya Rab. Thank you. I think just, a prophetic way of being fueled by compassion and not aggression. And if we can just at all times, keep our lens on that. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam as our greatest example. Barakallahu fikum, dear Brother Jamaluddin. I think we are good in terms of other questions, and if you would like to end with a closing dua, inshallah.
Of course. I just wanted to say we continue this discussion, my beloved brothers and sisters. This is an ongoing discussion. And in all honesty, it's a reminder for myself and all of us, like forgiveness is important, but of course, justice is important as well. So it's a balance, because hate takes away our humanity in the sense that it's a black and white thinking doesn't allow us to see the nuances in life. Yeah. People can always change. Look at just the descendants of Genghis Khan. They became Muslims. This is astonishing. You know what the Mughals did when they came to Middle East? They destroyed the whole Middle East. Yeah. It's shocking. And 2 generations afterward, they became the ambassadors of Islam. Who built the Taj Mahal? It was the Mughals. They brought Arabic and Persian into the Indian, subcontinent, the Indo-Pak subcontinents, Indo-Pak Bengali subcontinent. So we need to have that in mind, and don't allow aggression to drive you. Balance the aggression, and you become courageous. This is the words from Imam Ghazali. So we have seen in history when the oppressed becomes the oppressor, and the Zionism is a great example. But we have seen it in Muslim history as well. We as Muslims are not perfect. Islam is perfect. Muslims are not perfect. I'm not perfect. And I think a lot of the secular ideologies, they don't have notions of forgiveness and tawbah, and that people can repent and change themselves. It's all about throwing people under the bus, or it's all about, for instance, canceling people and stuff. We cancel actions, but we don't cancel people, because people can change. People can better themselves and do tawbah. If we had cancel culture during the time of the Sahaba, most of the Sahaba will be canceled. A lot of them came from Jahiliyyah. They were converts and reverts to Islam, right? So take Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu as an example. He was an oppressor before he became a Muslim. But what happened is he is an example of a full tazkiyat an-nafs, where all his negative attributes, by the purification that came from Allah, became positive attributes. And he became one of the greatest Muslims who ever walked on earth. Ooh, we love him. We really love him. And this is an example that we need to work with ourselves. Who could have thought that Omar will become that person before he became that person? So we never know if our enemies becomes Muslim. We have seen it all over the Western world. A lot of the right-wing extremists that are Islamophobes are becoming Muslim, some of them. So keep doing dua. It's your best weapon. And let's never have black and white thinking. Because we can easily, anti-Zionism is legitimate. Anti-Judaism is not. We can, of course, have differences with Jews theologically. Of course, there's two different religions. We can have debates, but we don't hate them. The Prophet never hated the Jews. Never. You know, Ahl al-Kitab, these are people of the book. They believe in God. We believe in God. And the Zionists are not, most of them are not religious. Theodor Herzl hated religion. It's a fact. He saw the Jewish people, the Jewish religious people, as backwardly. But then he understood, in order to build this nationalistic movement, because Zionism was inspired by the European Renaissance thoughts on nationalism being the savior, all right? And a lot of the Jews felt like the other Jews who were religious were backward. We need to become modern, and they became nationalists, which is Zionism. We had that in the Muslim world with all this, you know, Persian nationalistic movements, Turkish nationalistic movements, Arab nationalistic movement. They were quite secular movements, right? So Zionism is a nationalistic and fascistic movement, right? And it was a reaction to oppression. And it was not religious, because if you look at the Jewish people that are religious, and also many of the anti-Zionist Jewish people are not religious, but they're human, they're connected to the hearts, right? And of course, as I mentioned, a lot of the Zionists are not even Jews. There are Christian Zionists and secular Zionists, etc. Nevertheless, what happens is that within the concept of religion, you can always grow. But a lot of secular ideologies like nationalism, etc., there is no aspect of growth. You know, there's, oh, okay, we're the best nation, we're the best ethnicity, we're the best gender, we're the best identity, we're the best this and that and this and that. All these are anthropocentric identities that are not God-given. It's made by humans. And there's, if you're not like us, khalas, get away. Even in political movements and ideologies, there are these type of things. That's why our activism needs to be sacred. You need to always have tawheed. It cannot be only horizontal, which is the dunyawi, the worldly realm. It needs to be vertical, which is to connect with the ukhrawi, the hereafter realm. That's really important. And we have a really great lecture in ISIP YouTube channel with one of my great teachers and mentors, Imam Dawood Walid, where he speaks about sacred activism, and he criticizes a lot of the secular activism for being black and white. Now, we're not against those that are, you know, our brothers and sisters in the fight for justice and the plight of, for instance, the Palestinians. The plight of Palestinians is beyond Muslims. It's for Christians, Jews, seculars, everybody who believes in humanity. We will, you know, collaborate together for the rights of the Palestinians, of course. But we need to have our spirituality with us. Because when we fight, if we lose ourselves and we win, what happens? We need to have Islam. We believe that Islam is the solution in the end of the day. And what is Islam? To work with yourself. Don't judge others. Have husnadan. Do tawbah. Don't point fingers to others. Don't do ghaibah. Don't backbite, etc. So the oppressed will not become the oppressor if he or she works with themselves simultaneously as they're fighting for justice. And we have a lot to learn from the Palestinians. I was listening to a lot of the interviews of our beloved brothers and sisters in Gaza. Not one time did they curse the oppressors.
Yeah.
They're on a higher spiritual state than what we are, in all honesty. And I'm not here to romanticize anything. I don't like to romanticize people's pain. Like, oh, there's nothing romantic in pain. But we have the Palestinian brothers and sisters as our role model. They have waken up the whole ummah and the whole world. Because what I see in the resistance of a lot of the Palestinian people, and I get tears, like, it's so compassionate. The man was walking with a white flag and he was shot by a sniper. I saw the picture this other day from this ITV news. You know, because in the end of the day, they have belief in Allah. And that's why the iman is strong. So we need to keep that. And I think when you become the oppressor, when you've been oppressed, then you lose your iman. You lose your faith in Allah. Because Allah is just. And we'll just look at Salahuddin Ayyubi when he, and there are so many stories. I need to say this. When Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, when he enters Al-Quds and Jerusalem, Urshalim, after the opening of Urshalim and Al-Quds, And the Christians actually the Christians there supported them, the Muslims, to open up, because the Byzantine Christians were oppressing the Christians that were from that part of the world. Sayyidina Omar, and this is a true story, Sayyidina Omar was asking the head priest of the church there in Jerusalem, where's the Jews? Where's the Jews? And he said, I'm sorry, they're not here. They were killed. They were killed, massacred. He said, how could you guys massacre them? And he asked one of his viziers, one of his military leaders, to go and bring, I don't know how many Jewish families from other parts of the land and resettle them in Jerusalem. So many of the Palestinian Jewish people who've been living there before 1948 in Jerusalem are the descendants of those that Sayyidina Omar brought back. This is Rahman compassion. This is Islam. We should always make dua for our enemies to change, that Allah will change their hearts. And we should always be in that state. And we can learn from other, like there are secular leaders that had this notion in them, like Nelson Mandela in South Africa. And who is fighting for the Palestinian rights? It's the South Africans who brought the Israeli government to the IGC, to the International Court of Justice, ICJ, sorry. We have a lot to learn, inshallah.
Ameen. Ya Rab. Thank you so much. Maybe that's our takeaway, that our dua is our weapon. And so inshallah, with that, if you'd like to close with our dua, inshallah. Barakallahu fikum to you. May Allah bless you for this and for everything that you're doing for the ummah. Jazakallah khairan to all the brothers and sisters who are joining us here. We are gathering at ISAP on a bi-weekly basis. As Seyed Jamaluddin mentioned, we also have healing and resilience circles. We have one tomorrow happening on Sundays at 2 p.m. GMT, and everyone is welcome to join that as well. So inshallah, we will finish here with our closing du'as, and we pray that inshallah you keep us and keep the ummah in your du'as, keep Seyed Jamaluddin in your du'as, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Go ahead, Jamaluddin.
Thank you so much, Sister Fatima, for conducting the session in such an excellent way with your questions. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for all of your amazing questions. It's an honor to be with all of you, and I learn from all of you. You're all our sources of knowledge. I just added my email address and my WhatsApp number there. Feel free to reach out if you have any other questions. I'm always at your service as your brother. And all of you in this Zoom session today, all of you have so much experience and knowledge that I learned from. I saw Sister Asma, my beloved sister, here today, and I learned a lot from her when she spoke about how she processed her grief. And so Sister Asma, thank you for joining us today. And also Brother Adil from Kashmir, Sister Aisha from Singapore, and Ajarutu from Indonesia, and Anisa, and Annalisa, and Aisha, Aisha, Azlina, Balkis, Carolina, Jemre, Daoub, Dania, our beloved sister Dania, International Secretary of ISIP. Dania, thank you so much for joining. Dr. Seema, my beloved sister, she's been through a lot of grief, and how she's processed that is really remarkable and inspirational. And we have Dua with us, and Fatima, Zahra, Fatima again, Fikri Nisa, Halima, Hanifa, Hina, Ibrahim, Iznan, Khudja, Dina, Putri, Retno, and so many others. Afaf, Zoom, Gebruker, Wazif, Maria, Teresa, Tanwir, Suzianti, Suchi, Solution, Focus, Sana, Nurain, my beloved sister from Australia and India, who is so knowledgeable in this, and Salma, Rosita, Razi, Retno, and Putri, and all of you who joined today. Thank you so much. All of you have so much experience. I hope my lecture was a benefit, and I wish you all a great continuation of the day. Please join the ISAP movement. This is your movement. This is your family. You're all most welcome. If you want to establish a local and regional chapter in your country, reach out to us through our WhatsApp group, or to me or Fatima or other colleagues directly. You guys can also email us. And as I mentioned, if you guys need any counseling support, please reach out to us. We have colleagues that are trained and can be of your service, inshallah. So, and if you want to join any of our task forces, like our crisis support group, feel free to email contact@isap.foundation or reach out to us personally. All right, take care of yourself, dear brothers and sisters. I wish you all a great continuation of the day. It's been an honor to be with all of you. And thank you once more, Sister Fatima and Sister Nadira, for the amazing work that you guys are doing, and to all of my colleagues all over the world. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.